Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Kroger. What a show we have for you here. Final live one for us here for a week. We've got some really fun pre-recorded things we're going to be doing for you next week. Can't wait to tell you all about that, some special stuff we've never really done on DawgNation Daily, at least not very much. We'll do that and explain all that here coming up. But, boy, talk about today. A lot of interesting recruiting stuff, including one of the recent signees to Georgia, earning some high praise from ESPN. We think that has a tangible impact on how things play out for Georgia here this season. We're going to talk about why, and we'll sort of stir the possible rumor. We'll do some of that here over the course of our time together there as well. So let's go ahead and get it rolling here on a Friday. Glad to have you with us. It's DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Kroger, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I think you're going to like this. We've said before that in this day and age, when you look at the kind of signees a program like Georgia has, and this is true probably for any program, but it's Georgia we talk about, when you look at those signees in any given recruiting class, it's the ones who have a chance to play right away who matter more than the others, with all due respect, because as we've seen, sometimes even for touted freshmen who could have a bright future, if they don't find that immediate impact, they have a tendency to get a little restless, have a tendency to want to kind of move on and see if the grass might be greener somewhere else. Georgia's not immune to that the same way any other program is. So when we look at a number one class like Georgia just brought in, the question that sort of races to the top of everyone's mind is, okay, well, of these guys, who are the ones that can play right away? Who are the guys that could help Georgia in its pursuit of a possible national championship for 2024? Who is that, and who could that be? And it's interesting to know that the biggest entity of them all is touting a freshman in particular as being able to perhaps be able to do just that for Georgia here this season. I think this is really interesting, and I like the way that Connor Riley framed this at DawgNation.com when he wrote about this. The notion of the top newcomer for UGA. And I want to read what Connor wrote about this because I think that Connor sort of explains this in a really good way in the fact that Georgia brings in a lot of transfer players. Connor writes that ESPN recently tried its hand at predicting which of those newcomers will either be the most important for Georgia in the 2024 season. As Connor mentioned, you got Trevor Etienne coming in. You got Colby Young coming in. You've got Ben Urisic, the tight end from Stanford, coming in. You've got London Humphreys, the wide receiver from Vanderbilt, coming in. That Georgia would seem to have really helped itself in the transfer portal in this offseason, bringing in sort of ready-made, experienced players that will contribute from perhaps the word go. But as Connor points out, Tom Van Haren from ESPN did not name any of those as the top newcomer for Georgia, instead naming a freshman, the five-star cornerback signee, Ellis Robinson. And the quote from Van Haren about Robinson at ESPN.com is this, that he's 6'1", 180 pounds from IMG Academy, and he should be, here's the word we like, instant impact recruit for the Dogs. He will help continue the long-standing tradition of excellent secondary players and fits exactly what Coach Kirby Smart and his staff want in a cornerback. So there you go. In a time in which the players that can play right away matter more than others, Robinson is touted as a guy who can be that instant impact dude. And it's kind of worth noting, I don't know how much attention I always pay to this sort of comparison of the individual player rating over the course of years. I'm not oftentimes sure how accurate some of that kind of stuff always proves to be. I do believe in the categories, 5-star, 4-star, things like that, but the individual player ratings, I think, get pretty specific, and I think the more specific you get, the more difficult it is to be truly accurate. But the point is if you care about like the individual player ratings, this is one of the highest rated players that Georgia has ever signed in the Kirby Smart era, predating that. This is a big-time prospect. In fact, ESPN has liked Ellis Robinson for a very long time, and so therefore they're calling him the sort of instant impact guy that Georgia fans are going to be very impressed with right away, even more so than just based on the kind of the conceit of the piece, the concept of the piece, even more so than players other positions who have more experience. They're sort of more interested in Robinson right now than anybody else. And what you love about this is that's obviously a level of fame and attention that could perhaps sometimes go to a player's head, and maybe, the old school, adage of being worried about recruits is sort of a little bit more into the glamour and the glitz of it all, and perhaps not all that into the thing that Georgia's famous for, which is taking these very talented players, finding a way to make them more mentally and physically tough, and then getting the best out of them that way. The truth is when you come to a guy like Ellis Robinson, I don't think you have to worry quite so much about that. One of the reasons why that's the case is because of what Kirby Smart has sort of said about him and the other 2024 defensive back signees. This is a clip we've actually played for you before the other day when we were talking about DeMello Jones, who impressed so many folks during those state championship games in Mercedes-Benz Stadium back in December. But in the context of all of this, Ellis Robinson, who's actually a higher-rated recruit even than Jones is, and getting the attention for ESPN today, what Kirby Smart said about all these guys way back in December, all of a sudden this feels more relevant once again. Pretty strong praise here from Kirby for Robinson and these other 2024 defensive back signees.
They all got good speed. DeMello's a track guy, can run. Andre Evans can run. Ellis can run. And KJ runs track and can run. They're all four got great speed. They're all tremendous character kids. I mean, like they're fun to be around. DeMello is a fun guy to be around. Those other guys are fun guys to be around. And, they'll have growth to do. They'll have to grow up. But we're in need at that position. We're under our what I call our quota. We're under our quota there. And they're going to get thrust into some opportunities to get to go out there and play and compete.
So if you want to have an idea of why Ellis Robinson is a five-star, ESPN thinks he could be an instant impact guy, but that doesn't create, apparently, some huge sense of ego in him because Kirby Smart says he's still fun to be around. And he's long and he can run. I mean, that's what a cornerback is right there, especially the SEC level. Do you have good length? Can you run? Are you coachable? Do you fit into a program like UGA that asks a lot from its defensive backs but has the potential to reward them with being future first-round picks the way that Kamari Lassiter might be here this upcoming spring? That is what Ellis Robinson apparently brings to the table. And to kind of further this point a little bit more, our Jeff Sentell had a chance to catch up with Ellis back in Orlando around the Under Armour game. And, the whole notion of kind of what he expects from himself at the college level and the fact that none of this seems to be going to his head at all, even though he is one of the highest rated recruits of all time that Georgia signed and the kind of guy that ESPN thinks could be a player kind of right away from the word go. In the case of Robinson, though, basking in those accolades, he seems uninterested in that. Instead, more interested in what he needs to do to make sure all of those predictions actually come true. I like this from Ellis in his own words back in December.
I'm just trying to go into Jordan and just work, really. That's all I'm trying to really focus on, just working.
You see guys going in the portal and out of the portal. I think Julian came back to Georgia this evening. Does that motivate you all? Like, I need to be ready just in case? Like, how do you approach that?
I mean, either way you go, I'm still going to be locked in. I'm still going to work regardless, no matter who's there. So, I'm always going to compete.
So, listen, in that short clip that you just heard from Ellis Robinson, you heard him use the word work and hard work a couple of different times. That is clearly what he's all about. That is clearly what he wants to do. So all of this seems really, really great. ESPN touts Ellis Robinson. Kirby Smart has touted Ellis Robinson. Robinson himself has sort of openly declared his commitment to hard work. There's nothing that you don't like about that at all. But let's kind of take this to sort of that next level here for a moment of, okay, what specifically could this mean? Smart talks about the quota they need of defensive backs, that all of those 2024 signees help sort of fill a void of Georgia, who needs as many players as it can get at those positions. There's obviously that. But then beyond that, okay, but what specifically does that look like? And if Robinson is kind of a player right away and getting significant playing time, if he could perhaps emerge as a starter, kind of how would his playing profile be put on display? The best that I can tell is there are a couple of different kinds of really good cornerbacks that you see at the UGA level, the SEC level, and I think it's kind of interesting to talk about the difference between the two. Like, on the one hand, you sort of have the Kamari Lassiter, kind of player. I mentioned that a moment ago, where Lassiter's one of those guys, almost like a good umpire, where you don't really think about him that much. It's like if you're thinking too much about the umpire at a baseball game, that means the umpire's probably messed up. In the case of a lockdown corner, the fact that you could go a long period of time, sometimes within a game, without thinking much about Kamari or having announcers mention his name, I think was sort of perhaps a testament to the fact that Lassiter was just sort of taking care of his side of the field and perhaps encouraging quarterbacks and offensive coordinators to think about the other side of the field as the place they may want to go with the football. That's kind of what Lassiter did. He did his job in such a solid way that oftentimes it would go unnoticed because of how, consistent he was at kind of taking care of his side of the field. And that's certainly a thing that Ellis Robinson might be able to do. But I also wonder if Ellis Robinson could perhaps also be a little bit of a different kind of cornerback for UGA and kind of bring the sort of dynamic level of athleticism that's made him a 5-star and made him so touted and made him get so much attention. And perhaps if that could help Georgia kind of unearth something that we sort of think the 2023 defense was missing a little bit, that Georgia just wasn't quite as, I used the word, I think, dynamic a moment ago. The Georgia defense in 2023, while it was certainly solid, was just not quite as dynamic as the best of Georgia has been. Maybe 2021 as the shining example of this. That's obviously maybe the greatest defense of all time. But nonetheless, that is a standard that's available to UGA. And in some respects, the 2023 defense was probably just a level or two below that. And I think one of the best ways to measure that, remember the old days, Kirby Smart circa like say 2019 or so was talking a lot about havoc rate, the sort of percentage of sacks, tackles for losses, passes broken up, turnovers that you were getting, and that Georgia really wanted to increase its so-called havoc rate. And at various times they've done, better or, not quite as well, depending on what you're looking at a given moment. I was looking at some of the stats here for this past year, and I saw one stat block. I don't know if this is accurate, but the best I can tell it is that Georgia was 21st last year with a havoc rate of 18.6%. The more basic counting stats sort of tell you a similar thing. Georgia this past season was just 20th in America with 14 total interceptions, tied for 65th in America with 72 tackles for loss, and tied for 47th in America with 30 sacks. Now, if you're Ellis Robinson on the field as a freshman, you may not be getting lots of tackles for loss and you may not be getting lots of sacks. But if you are really locking down your guy, your side of the field, and creating a situation where a quarterback has a hard time getting rid of the football, does that create more opportunities for sacks? And if the front seven, the edge rushers, if they really feel like you've got your situation locked down, does that free them up? Does that free Glenn Schumann and DeVaris Robinson, the defensive coaching staff, does that free them up more to turn the guys up front loose? And can Georgia kind of get back to the sort of stuff behind the line of scrimmage with sacks and tackles for loss that sort of made the 2021 defense as famous as it was? And obviously for Georgia, who did not have a real strong penchant for turnovers a year ago, the kind of athlete that Robinson is, if he does truly earn his way onto the field for his first season here at UGA, he perhaps could play a big role in kind of getting Georgia back to some of that kind of stuff there as well. There is a lot that's right, in other words, about Georgia defensively, but there is a level of achievement available to that unit, the Georgia defense, that probably didn't get fully unlocked in 2023. So as you hear ESPN and all the recruiting websites saying all these nice things about Ellis Robinson, as you hear Kirby Smart himself sort of validating the fact that Robinson, does bring a lot to the table, I think it's kind of fun this time of year to think about what that could mean for the Georgia defense. A Georgia defense that was at times solid last year while not always being spectacular. Maybe there's a chance to do some more of the spectacular, explosive, dynamic things on defense here this year. The havoc rate, the kinds of plays that produce turnovers and lost yards that make Georgia really tough to beat. Maybe a guy like Ellis Robinson could earn his way onto the field and help Georgia improve in those statistical categories for the upcoming season. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Good to have you as a part of our program today, no matter how you get to us. Of course, we're first and 15, DawgNation.com, and on the DawgNation app. 10 a.m. across all video platforms after that. We're on the radio, Athens, Sports Radio 960 The Ref, podcast, however you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. Our good friend Kaylee Manziel helping us get that up each and every day. We certainly appreciate all of that, and we appreciate our friends at Kroger for making today's show possible for you there as well. And how exciting is this? The Guided Kids cooking experience known as Kroger Chef Jr. returns again here this month, the month of March anyway, I should say. You just got one more day to do this. You got February 17th here coming up. So one more time to do this here in February. That's February 17th. and this month making pineapple salsa. So that's coming up here this weekend. Your chance to be a part of that. Select Kroger locations. To find one near you, you can go to the website KrogerChefJr.com. The word junior spelled out, Junior, Kroger Chef Jr. Find out how you can make the pineapple salsa with you and your child there. And then also get all the great kind of accoutrements that go along with that, such as the apron, the patch, the chef's hat, the chopper. You can also get a recipe card and holder. And as I said before, it's just $7 per child. So check out KrogerChefJr.com for more on that. That's KrogerChefJr.com. One more chance to check that out this month. That's this weekend. And you can find out a participating location near you and make yourself some pineapple salsa with your child. That'll be a lot of fun, and it's just $7 per child. Okay, before we do anything else, let me give you a little bit of a programming note about next week. We think we got something really fun for you in store. I am stepping away from work. I think I've mentioned this every February, kind of like our kids are out of school for a little bit, so it gives us a chance to sort of be with the kids a little bit, something we want to take as much opportunity to do as we possibly can. So we appreciate your patience as I do that. And the one thing you should know, and hopefully I've said this enough over the years, we take very seriously the kinds of shows we put together for you while I'm not here. So one of the things we're going to do next week. Now, Monday's show is going to kind of be just a normal DawgNation Daily. We're going to record that today. It'll air on Monday. That's fresh content. There may be some news that breaks over the weekend, but and if so, DawgNation will obviously be covering that in all forms and fashions. But Monday's show will just sort of be a typical pre-recorded edition of DawgNation Daily. Speaking of Kaylee, we're going to bring her on for a Kaylee's Corner again. We enjoyed that a couple of weeks ago, so we'll do that. But it's also, in addition, just sort of a regular episode of DawgNation Daily. Friday, we're back live again, so there you go on that. So just a few days worth of kind of non-live shows. But on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, we've invited the regular DawgNation contributors that you normally hear here. That's Mike Griffith, that's Connor Riley, that's Jeff Sentell. We're going to do what we call the DawgNation Roundtable. It'll be the four of us just kind of going through a list of topics, some involving Georgia, some involving the SEC, some involving the full width of the the sport of college football overall. And we're just going to kick around some topics and have a really good time with that. We've recorded that already. I think it turned out really well. I thought all of our DawgNation teammates really brought their A game there on that. A lot of work and a lot of time went into doing this. But I think you're going to really like it. I think it's some of the best stuff we've done here in a little while. So we'll do that with you coming up Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday of next week. In other words, we've got some great shows, even though I will not be live for some of them, but back live again on Friday. So if anything happens, we'll be there to react to that then. And obviously the rest of the DawgNation folks will be here to react to that while I am gone. Now you might say, well, BA, what could happen? Is there anything out there that perhaps could happen? I don't know, but you never know. I don't guess. So with that in mind, let's get ready to transition to Around the Doghouse here, poured by the Finnish Long Drink. And just for a minute, because sometimes we like to have a little fun, just for a minute, I'm going to sort of stir the pot a little bit about a possible rumor that might start to take shape just a little bit. You remember Keon Sabb? That's a name we once talked about around DawgNation as a recruit. Four-star safety coming out of IMG Academy, took a official visit to Georgia. Georgia was kind of in the mix. When it was all said and done, Sabb chose Michigan. You may be aware that Michigan recently lost its head coach, Jim Harbaugh. You may be aware, because Alabama went through this, that in this day and age, when a head coach leaves, that opens up a 30-day transfer portal window for players when their head coach is gone. And at least one, of the Michigan players has decided to take advantage of that transfer portal window. Reportedly, we'll show you this from Pete Nakos at On3. Aforementioned Keon Sabb has entered the transfer portal. On3 Sports has learned. The former top 100 prospect and four-star recruit had 28 tackles and 2 interceptions this past season. So let's connect the dots here for a moment. And this may be somewhat reckless speculation, but if it is, it's more of a misdemeanor than a felony. In this particular case, we know that Georgia once recruited Sabb, hosting him on visits. We know that Georgia thus far this season has had interest in a safety in the transfer portal. Now, that may have been more an example of sort of best player available than position of need, perhaps, because obviously you've had a chance to get Caleb Downs. Of course, you would want him. We now know, and this is water under the bridge, but Downs made the decision to go to Ohio State. But if Georgia was open for business when it came to an elite safety, and it's not going to be Caleb Downs, Could someone like Keon Sabb here be another really good option for UGA? I mean, I'd say there's a chance, right? I mean, let's just think about the possibilities here. I'd say there's a chance. Now, you may come back and say, well, BA, what about the scholarship numbers? I think I've told you this before. At this point in time, I've given up on the scholarship numbers. I have no idea. The only thing I can assume of the scholarship number, because I think right now we have Georgia at about 90, I think, which they're only allowed to have 85. I think the 90 number is what we're kind of working with right now. All we can assume is that Georgia behind the scenes has this figured out. They're not going to sort of publicly explain their accounting processes here, nor do they necessarily need to. It's their prerogative to, as long as they're taking care of business, it's their prerogative to keep their trade secrets, somewhat secret if they want to. But the point is, I'm not going to let an 85 scholarship limit stop me from the possibility that maybe Georgia goes out and gets a guy like Keon Sabb. And I guess sort of one more kind of small point on this, and this is mostly just for fun. When Georgia, a couple of different times, was trying to recruit Caleb Downs, what was the one thing we always heard? Now, you never know how much of this stuff is really true and how much of this is just sort of the received wisdom of the rumor mill. But the one thing we heard over and over again about Georgia's pursuit of Caleb Downs is it was always just sort of doomed from the start because apparently Georgia did not recruit Josh Downs, Caleb's brother, well enough. Downs was a very good wide receiver, ended up at UNC. Georgia perhaps did not give the older Downs the attention they thought he deserved in the recruiting trail, and so therefore the Caleb Downs recruitment just never quite went the way it was supposed to go because there was a little bit of a sour relationship, we're told, allegedly, involving Georgia and Josh Downs. Well, guess what? Here's what I'm here to tell you. In the person of Keon Sabb, apparently that's not going to be a problem because I'm here to happily report that many, many years ago, Georgia did offer Keon Sabb's brother a scholarship. So therefore, whatever may have plagued Georgia when it comes to Caleb Downs and Josh Downs, you might be led to believe that won't be a problem for Keon Sabb. In fact, let me go way back here to May 24th, 2021, when Georgia offered Amari Sabb a scholarship. Sabb is a prospect, I think, for the class of 2026, but he was offered by Georgia on May 24th, 2021, saying at the time, when the platform was still known as Twitter, blessed to receive an offer from Georgia. And he tags a whole bunch of people there in that. So Georgia has offered Keon Sabb's brother. So therefore, you won't have the Caleb Downs, Josh Downs problem to worry about here. Now, do I know for a fact that Georgia's going to go after Keon Sabb? Do I know for a fact that Georgia's got room for Keon Sabb? Do I know for a fact that Sabb would want to come to Georgia? Obviously, he chose Michigan the first time around. I don't know any of that. But am I openly speculating here because it's a little bit fun? Yeah, I guess in a roundabout way I am. That if Georgia did go after Caleb Downs a couple of weeks ago, then maybe they might be interested in a guy like Sabb there as well. It's at least worth following, right? So we'll see where all of that goes. And we'll make that around the doghouse here today, poured by our friends at the Finish Long Drink. And speaking of having fun on the weekend, boy, what a great time it is to do that. And there's no better way to do that than with the Finish Long Drink. The ready-to-drink cocktail that looks like a beer because it comes in a can, but it's not. It's a ready-to-drink cocktail. It's a mixed drink that's already mixed for you. And we heard from our good friend Dina Pruitt the other day. She won a golden shoe because she found some of that long drink peach-flavored version. She said, "BA, I thought you were a liar because I couldn't find it anywhere. It's so popular. It's been selling out left and right." But she found it. She tracked it down. That's how enjoyable the flavor of the Finish Long Drink is. And that's why if you haven't tried some, it's your time to do that. Or it may be your time to go pick some up again for a really fun and enjoyable weekend for whatever you have planned and going on. So make sure you find The Long Drink online at thelongdrink.com. You can read more about the story of kind of how it came to be in Helsinki back in the 1950s when the Summer Games were there, then in America, now in Georgia, and pretty much everywhere, whether it's the peach-flavored version, the Long Drink Cranberry, the Long Drink Strong, the Long Drink Traditional, the Blue Can, the Grapefruit Flavor, the Gin Kick. You all know that's kind of my favorite on all of that. But you can find it today. So find them online, thelongdrink.com, for a lot more on that. That is thelongdrink.com for a lot more on that. All right, so before we're done with the program today, maybe a little bit of hypocrisy on the part of the Big Ten. We'll kind of tell you about that. At least one Georgia player seems pretty set up for success when it comes to the exciting new EA Sports college football video game. We'll tell you about that and kind of all the details as it relates to that, and have just a good time here before we wrap it up on a Friday. But for now, what you came for, the recruiting information, what's next for Georgia, some big names in the news. Let's see if we can cover all of that ground right now. Welcome on Jeff Sentell here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
A lot of recruiting stuff to get into with Jeff Sentell, so let's dive into this. And, Jeff, I was joking somewhat in our Around the Doghouse segment before you joined us. You know, Georgia went after a safety of the day. Caleb Downs didn't quite work out. Now you got a new safety in the market, Keon Sabb. Georgia has offered his brother, so therefore that's a box that's kind of checked on this. This is a guy that's been hosted on visits. You've written about him a number of times there at DawgNation.com, and now he's back on the open market again. I have no idea from an accounting standpoint how Georgia would find room, just given the fact they seem like they got about 100 players on scholarship right now as it is. But any chance you think Georgia kicks the tires on Keon Sabb, reportedly newly entered into the transfer portal after the departure of Jim Harbaugh from Michigan? Or I'm not hearing Jeff. I don't know if that's his end or our end. Let's see. We got Jeff.
Brandon, how's that? I was going back in the Wayback Machine. Is that better?
Yeah, you're awesome. Now we can hear you. Sound great.
So that's a name I hadn't heard in a while. Did you bring up his younger brother who Georgia offered when he was like in diapers?
No, I absolutely did. I said that, listen, for all the worry about what Georgia may not have done with Josh Downs when it comes to Caleb Downs, they offered Keon Sabb's brother like 10 years ago. That scholarship offer has been proffered and extended. So therefore, if that's a prerequisite for elite safeties, in the case of Sabb, you can check that box for the Dogs.
Yeah, Mari probably is on the short list of, I kind of keep these records on the short list of basically earliest offers for Georgia ever. Earliest means what time of school year they were. It'd be really hard for me to keep the actual month and year. But Amari's on that list. Amari's a guy that he's a 2026, so he's still got a while. But the thing you need to know about Keon Sabb is it takes you back to, remember, Brandon, when Venables was recruiting for Clemson and he took the Oklahoma job. Well, Clemson had like 3 or 4 5-stars in that for the defensive side of the ball in the class that they'd lost. Georgia, you will remember, and gleefully chortled that they benefited from that. That's how they ended up with 5-star corner Dalen Everett. Venables leaving Clemson. That's how Keon Sabb leave Clemson. He was committed to Clemson. He ends up in Michigan. Venables might even be in Oklahoma, might even be a stop there for Sabb. But I would say Georgia. I mean, Brandon, remember, Kirby Smart signed like 12 defensive backs in 2017. When he's not happy with his defensive backs room, he goes overboard like some folks, an auntie or a grandma or a mama with Christmas shopping or something like that. But they brought in Jake Pope. You're hearing great things about Jake Pope. They still got Dan Jackson. So, the safety cupboard is not bare, but, Keon Sabb's a great player going to play in the league. So I'm quite positive that Georgia will at least kick the tires on that one.
So let me ask you this, whether it be Sabb or somebody else, I joke about this all the time. I no longer care about scholarship numbers. I'm not interested because the best I can tell, Georgia's got 90 or whatever right now, and seemingly that's not slowing down their pursuit of other players, even though there's supposed to be an 85-man limit. So, how does Georgia sort of do this? I mean, clearly they're bound by the same rules everybody else is, but they also have, their own trade secrets when it comes to their accounting practices on this. Give me just sort of a small, simple thumbnail sketch of how Georgia seems to manage this I didn't think all of last year, by appearances, Georgia was over the scholarship number there as well. We know they can't be. So what are they doing?
Yeah, I know you have a lot of loved ones that are accountants in your circle, Brandon,
sure.
But I would say that there was ways that they can get some trickeration going here with this. And what I mean by that, a small little detail is Brandon, we obviously don't know who all comes to the University of Georgia on scholarship. They can be announced, they can be trumpeted, but that young man could be a really bright student. He can get academic money from UGA, or he might not even need the full athletic grant. Or there could be players that have already graduated or players that have been on campus for a couple years and still not playing, and they decide to go off scholarship, but maybe pay their own way, or they're strong enough student where they can garner scholarships internally on their own. Brandon, walk-ons now, it's not unheard of for walk-ons to get collective dollars as well, so they could pay their way through. So there could be a lot of creative cooking in the books here, which would all be above board. But what general Joe media type or general expert media type that keeps these things on spreadsheets knows that they could put down 87, 88, 89 scholarships on paper, and that might not actually be reality. The other thing to think about there as well is there's still, I believe, 7, 8 more Bulldogs that have not yet reported on campus in this class, and there's some that can graduate. There's some that can move on after spring practice and hop into the transfer portal, that May transfer portal, April transfer portal window. So it's all about, do you have 85 on scholarship at one time enrolled drawing aids? So you can really blur a lot of lines there with some summer enrollees in May versus some graduates that take off and everything else like that. I mean, heck, Benjamin Yurset could even get an NIL deal as well as a grad transfer student as well, and not exactly have to be on scholarship. Now, there's minutiae here. Like if you're not on scholarship, the team can't feed you, you can't show up, you can't practice on certain days. So there's minutiae to kind of check it out at times.
We talked about Ellis Robinson before you joined us. As the guy you wrote about, not too long ago at DawgNation.com, and obviously has spent a lot of time around. ESPN kind of calls him an instant impact player, perhaps even more so than some of the other transfer, guys on their way to Georgia who obviously have a lot more college experience. That's in keeping with the recruiting profile for Robinson. So I guess I'm curious to hear from you, how much of an immediate impact do you think that Ellis Robinson could make on Georgia here this year?
He's one of those guys, Brandon, could take a man's job. He's a job taker. I mean, Dalen Everett's going to be in year 3. We mentioned him earlier. Julian Humphrey was basically beloved in order to Georgia to keep him back and to bring him back in and keep him out of the portal. You've got a lot of options there at corner. You got Daniel Harris, man, who's really turning in some impressive off-season buzz and GPS times really all throughout his freshman year. He's got length, but Ellis is different, Brandon. I've been here for the Keely Ringos. I've been here for the Kamari Lassiters. I've been here for Tyson Campbell, Eric Stokes. Nyland Green, all these 5-star, highly rated corners. There's never been one quite like Ellis. 24/7 Sports even had him as the number 2 all-time prospect the Dogs have ever signed. Justin Fields, I believe, is the only one that was higher rated entering college than Ellis Robinson. Super player, super length. Brandon, he's been living a college athlete's mindset at IMG for several seasons now. He's just hardwired, man. He's a dude. He's ready to play. He loves competition. He's got length. He checks every box. I mean, internally, you hear things from the Georgia staff coming in, and they also kind of tout those rankings a little bit. You've heard that they feel that he is as skilled as any corner they've brought into the program during Kirby Smart's time, which might as well be forever, with great apologies there to Champ Bailey. Rankings weren't really around, so sure. Champ Bailey could be like a .999981 or something like that. But we all know how good Champ was, and I don't have any problem folks keeping the receipts there for saying, I think Ellis Robinson can be that type of cornerback, maybe not that special athlete that went both ways for Jim Donnan back in the day.
So you mentioned a couple of interesting names that I think are worth making the comparison here. I think about a Tyson Campbell, and I think about a Keely Ringo, and obviously both those guys came with huge expectations too, but people who would watch them in high school would say, Tyson Campbell actually hadn't played much cornerback, right, prior to being sort of classified as one. Keely Ringo was a great athlete, but in Arizona, a lot of that's on the offensive side of the ball, right? I mean, we knew he'd be a cornerback at a place like Georgia, but a lot of that was more about the long arms and the athleticism more so than like the polished cornerback play. Here's what I'm curious about from someone in your perspective who's seen Robinson a lot more. How does he compare in terms of the overall polish? Not just the athleticism. He's clearly got that, and he's got the length, the size, but how, well-trained is he? How polished is he? How much more of a true cornerback is he right now than guys like Campbell and Ringo would have been when they first came into Georgia?
I think that's the difference, Brandon. I think Ellis, about the only thing you can find somebody to say about Ellis is he doesn't run a 4.43 yet. Like he's only like a high 4.4, low 4.5. That's about the only thing. He doesn't have that, Mach 2 with your hair on fire, Top Gun Maverick speed yet, but he's plenty fast. And he's also been well-trained. Brandon, the other thing that he's benefited from is he's had kind of like a Lakers-Celtics rivalry on the recruiting trail. What I mean by that is everybody views Jeremiah J.J. Smith, the Ohio State signee, as kind of a generational prospect. And it's funny, Brandon, little side road here. I think the modern definition of generational means you're probably as good as anybody that's came out in the last 5 or 10 years. It gets skewed a lot because the term generational sounds really great. I've also heard a really smart scout tell me that they just totally changed the way they view that term. Generational to them means that you could play in any era. You could play in Champ's era. You could play in Lester Hayes' era. You could play in Dion's era. You can play in any era that you just have that ability. I don't think it's quasi classified anymore as you're the best player to come out in a generation. So I do think Ellis is very special. Perhaps the things that the fan base will get to see is he has incredible length. He has incredible technical polish. But going back to my Lakers Celtics point, he went head to head with Jeremiah J.J. Smith, the guy that they feel is a tick above, scouts feel, analysts feel, is a tick above what even like a George Pickens type was, a Marvin Harrison was coming out of high school. And Ellis won his share of those battles. He won more than his share of those battles. Sometimes he won, sometimes he lost, but everybody came away from that thing thinking Jeremiah J.J. Smith is the number one receiver in America, and they feel that Ellis Robinson is the number one corner in America as well. Like Darryl Stingley type impact, that's the type of buzz coming in about Ellis Robinson, and he certainly lives up to it from everything I've seen so far.
You wrote the other day about Tyler Atkinson, who's a rising junior linebacker from Grayson. I'm not a scout. I don't pretend to be one, but as somebody who watches a lot of high school football in Georgia, I don't know how many defensive players in our state right now are better than Atkinson. I think he fits in, to my eyes anyway, with some of the players you've seen come out of Grayson here over the course of the last decade or so. This is a guy that I think the Georgia fans, if they're not already fully acquainted with, are going to really want at UGA before it's all said and done. So kind of piggybacking off your story from the other day, give us a little bit of an update on kind of where things stand with Atkinson here right now.
Yeah, I think Georgia, what's the term here? Well-positioned. Brendan, I think he's probably going to go. He's got a top 10. I think there's probably 3 or 4 schools that can land him. I think Georgia is definitely one of those. The thing that's special to me about Tyler is work ethic. And he is a Georgia guy, even if he doesn't kind of commit to Georgia or sign with Georgia, in the thing where he sits at home at night thinking, have I got my lift in? Have I got my speed in? Have I gotten my film in? He already treats his career like he's a professional. He's pouring into hours because he knows those will pay off for him. It's about 6'3", about 205 right now. Looks like for Georgia, the projection is to be an inside backer and then go pass rush on third downs, kind of like Jalen Walker a little bit on third downs. And this is different, man. I'm going to tell you, doing this a lot of years, 150, 140 tackles for a senior is like, wow, terrific year, all-state year, all-American year. Well, Tyler, as a sophomore, had 197 tackles at Grayson High School. They don't play any cupcakes on that schedule. And he also had 10.5 sacks. Mm-hmm. And everybody knows where Tyler is. And the great schemes they have at Grayson were able to keep him clean so he could fly free to the ball and make plays. But, Brandon, I've been watching Tyler since he was in the 8th grade. That makes me think of Amari Saab. We were talking about him earlier. Yeah. Tyler was one of those offers. And Tyler kind of teaches me something now. When I see an 8th grader and I go, he looks like a guy Georgia would offer in the 10th grade. That's a Georgia guy. That's a special football player. And that's where kind of Tyler is right now. And when he was a 9th grader, he looked like a junior with Georgia offers. Last year with 197 tackles, he looked like a senior with Georgia offers. He told me recently, Brandon, that he's looking and preparing for his junior year of high school football like it's his first season of college football. Again, that 2 years, looking 2 years ahead mindset. Now, Brandon, I know you think 2 years ahead with your shows and everything else, kind of plotting everything out. But when Georgia tells him, you're okay in these areas and you need to get better, and this is what you'll have to get better at by the time you get to the college level, man, he takes that to heart. He's already like, no, these are weaknesses I have right now. Let me fix those. Let me just buff out those problems. Let me polish up those areas. Mindset, I mean, he's a stupid good athlete. He's really strong. Brandon, he's been working with Marcus Howard since his 8th grade year, working on pass rush, working on mindset, working on technique. This is a guy that will be a plug-and-play player in college football.
Well, real quick, as a follow-up on this, you mentioned something that I also noticed as well, which is 24/7 lists him as a linebacker. They don't list him as an edge rusher. So it sounds like that's just sort of conventional wisdom that he is an inside player to a place like Georgia. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah, definitely. Kind of the guys that stacked up, a stack backer. But Brendan, let's face it, this day and age, you got to be 6'5.5" with go-go gadget arms to get rated as an edged guy now. You got to look like maybe Damon Wilson even looks a little small for that, but you got to look like a Marvin Jones. You got to look like there's a young man out of New Jersey right now, a Nigerian native, Dared Ikenabon, and that's a guy that really likes Georgia. Georgia made his top 8, but it's kind of like, I know you're a theme park guy and you've got you remember those rides as a kid where you've got to be this high to be able to go on the ride? Well,
sure.
You get into Uzo Deribe's room, you got to probably be about 6'5" with about an 82-inch wingspan. You got to weigh about 240, because if you're just merely a 6'3" mortal sacking guys left and right, people will kind of think you're more of a linebacker that can maybe freelance into third down.
We talked to Terrence Edwards yesterday about one of his guys that he's training up, the 4-star wide receiver from Westlake, Travis Smith here. This is one of those names that I think is going to be important for Georgia, because the wide receiver position continues to be a position of need. Now, as we always point out, Georgia's still succeeding with the receivers that it's getting, but it's not, really winning a lot of high-level recruiting battles for wide receivers. And interesting to have a guy like that kind of in the Atlanta area, in-state, obviously a high school teammate of Wayne Gaston, who we know that Georgia's going to be recruiting there as well. How do you handicap the race for Travis Smith here right now for Georgia?
I think it's pretty good. I think Georgia got in quick. There's the development factor there. Georgia's prioritized him. Brandon, Georgia offered him back last summer when he had no stars. He did have a couple offers. I think Georgia was like his 4th or 5th offer, but he was 6'4", 195, burned up Georgia's camp. Georgia makes him feel like a priority, Brandon. You'll love that he loves to block, loves to get to the rock, loves those George Pickens highlights when he is embarrassing someone's child at the snap in major college football playoff games. And I'm going to say this, Brandon, and I know we love hot takes and we love people to be polarizing and, really screaming from the top of their lungs. But, Brandon, we've reached a point, man. Georgia might just be a transfer portal school in terms of the elite guys. I think Travis is a top 10 wide receiver in the country on on3.com. I don't think if Georgia can't sign Smith with ATL connections with BMAC, with priority, with getting on him early, with, constant visits or whatever, if Georgia winds up not being able to sign Travis Smith, man, I'm just going to go ahead and chalk it up and say the degree of difficulty for those top 10 wide receivers might be beyond Georgia's skis, no matter how well Georgia develops, no matter how well BMAC recruits, no matter how many wins they have. I do feel that the top wide receivers in the country are looking for that inducement from a collective, that NIL package. And I don't think Georgia's a program that's wired to do that right now. And I think Georgia will be competitive, but they will not be a high bid for a lot of these wide receivers where the going rate is very healthy 6 figures right now. And Travis is also, above all the other things, man, he is a great fit potentially for Georgia. His top 8, I kind of broke it down a different way than I've done in the past, because it was a way I wanted to show readers that when you stack up all the schools, and he's got Georgia Tech, Auburn, Alabama, Colorado's in there, Oklahoma's in there, Georgia putting the ball in the air, Brandon. You remember how we talked about this a long time, years ago with Jaden Hazelwood, where he wanted to see the ball in the air? Well, Georgia, the only school there, and thanks for flashing that graphic, the only school there that has air raid numbers or throwing numbers, offense numbers that compares with Georgia over the last year is Oklahoma. Georgia's actually second. I think Georgia was maybe 11th in overall passing offense, and then they were 5th or 6th in overall total offense. And, Carson's numbers are even better than that during prime time and not garbage time. Carson was one of the top 5 statistical passing yardage guys in the country. So Georgia is able now to kind of remove that demerit. I talked to a lot of receivers over the last week, Brandon, and the negative recruiting when people say, oh yeah, you think Georgia throws it a lot, but not to the receiver. They're throwing it to the Brock Bowers. Well, high school receivers I talk to, they get it. Maybe it's counter programming from Georgia, but people know who Brock Bowers is. And they're like, well, duh,
right.
You want to throw it to the top 10 draft pick in the nation. Like, are you telling me Georgia's not going to throw it to a top 10 NFL pick? so they can just make the numbers look better for their receivers? No, Georgia's going to get the ball to the most talented guy. They're going to spread it around. Brendan, there's a lot of talk right now about Georgia potentially pairing up a guy like we had Ethan Barbour on our show on Before the Hedges this week. C.J. Wiley at Milton, who I believe led the state in receiving yards a year ago, almost 1,500 yards in receiving through 15 games, I believe 14 touchdowns. Travis Smith and C.J. Wiley are really close. They trained together with Terrence Edwards. They were at Georgia for junior day. I was speaking to C.J. Wiley recently, and he basically said, man, Barbour at tight end, who those two also know really well because Barbour is really recruiting them hard for the Dogs. But he said, I'm on one side, Travis Smith is on the other side, Barbour's at tight end. There's no way people are stopping that. That would be unstoppable. So Georgia is able to recruit these guys where these guys are thinking we can go and be part of an arsenal of offensive weapons at Georgia.
Real quick final thing here. Saw where Christian Garrett dropped to top 7. A little bit unusual to see a 4-star defensive lineman from Athens. Obviously, they just don't, it's kind of a small community. They don't really produce a lot of, defensive linemen of that caliber necessarily. Also, you sort of think of Prince as being a little bit of an offensive program. Aaron Philo, Brock Vandegrift, but obviously producing a big-time defensive prospect here. And it seems like this may be a name for us to think about as this 2025 recruiting cycle sort of plays out here over the course of the next few months.
Big name. I mean, the thing with Christian Garrett is I think, Clemson and Georgia seem like to me the teams to watch there. Those are the two schools that he's already established official visits for. He's a guy, Brandon. The thing about him from a scouting perception that makes Christian so different is there's a lot of people nationally that are like, most of the 6'4" kids in America are usually right around 230 pounds. Some are linebackers or maybe they're wide receivers that are 200 pounds. And then there's a range from, if they're not 240, they might be 310 or 320 or 330 because they're interior defensive linemen. For Christian, he's about 6'4", about 275, 280. And that's a very rare height weight metric there for an elite All-American type defender. There's not a lot of guys that have that weight on them already at that size and that height that won't play like an interior defensive lineman. They can play outside a little bit. Christian's been to Athens a lot. He's a great kid, super kid. He feels like a guy that would fit well in with the culture there at Georgia. Also, throw some flowers to Prince Avenue because very quietly, maybe not so quietly anymore, they're becoming a program that's starting to churn guys out when maybe the Athens area didn't have a lot of players like that. They usually have about one or two Power 5 guys every year. Now, Christian's another great example of that. Speaking of kind of evaluation and blossoming, I think this is going to be a big weekend for a lot of guys in the state, man. The Under Armour camp is in it for Atlanta. Yeah. That's basically the last bastion of, I remember the days when there was an Under Armour camp and there was a Nike opening camp and there was, multiple national, regional kind of stops that came through and prospects went at it. And traditionally, Brandon, in Atlanta, kids are not even planning to play in the Under Armour. Will still go compete in that because they want that good work. But they may be going to the All-American Bowl out in San Antonio, but they still want to come to the camp. They want to get better. They want to kind of test their oil and check their oil against the other better prospects in the nation, or at least the Southeast. I expect Travis Smith to be there. And Brandon, Travis is going to work out at receiver in front of a lot of national eyes, those guys that move guys up the stars. And he will probably, if Travis does what Travis always does, he's going to goose his rankings coming out of that up from maybe a top 25, top 20 receiver on all the composites to where most are going to see him as a top 10 receiver in the country, and rightfully so. I'm on record that I think he's one of the best high school pure receiver prospects that have came out of the state of Georgia in quite some time. Now, Travis Hunter was obviously an athlete. Nicole Harden was also an athlete, but as far as a pure wide receiver, Travis Hunter has a lot of game, and that's a guy the Dogs kind of really have to sign in 2025.
Yeah, Travis Smith, you mean. Travis Hunter. That ship sailed.
Travis Smith. I got my Travs mixed up, but
no problem.
Maybe I'm speaking it into existence, man. Maybe Travis Hunter will portal back home for his junior season.
I like the thought of that, Jeff. That's really good stuff. We appreciate your time today. Lots of interesting recruiting information, obviously, and a lot of fun stuff to follow in the months to come as this 2025 recruiting cycle starts to take shape here a little bit. So we certainly appreciate that. Jeff, have a great weekend. Thanks for being here on DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. Thanks for your work for next week when it comes to our DawgNation Roundtable. We certainly appreciate that. And, of course, back here again on our program very soon as well.
Yeah, I love that, Brandon. You got some game for people next week, man. I guess we call it the round table. I like the huddle is the name of that for our group as well. But that's the good stuff. I'm sure folks will get a kick out of that.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. Appreciate it.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, love that. 2025 recruiting cycle starting to get going here. Some of these names to know for 2026 there as well. And who knows? Stirring the pot with a possible transfer portal rumor. We're not afraid to do that every now and then there as well. All in good fun, of course. And speaking of good fun, it's time to go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And man, oh man, there's a lot of fun to be had when it comes to Royal Caribbean here in 2024, but no more important piece of fun to think about than that DawgNation cruise coming up in April, leaving from Port Canaveral, going to Perfect Day, Coco Cay, Nassau, and the Bahamas. Honestly, it's that private island oasis right there that I think is unlike anything any other vacation has to offer for you. I mean, really, about my favorite place in the world to be is right there at Perfect Day, Coco Cay. That's always been true. It's even more true now. If you're watching a video, by the way, you see Perfect Day, Coco Cay, kind of off in the distance there. But the point is, it's the debut of Hideaway Beach that makes that now even more true than ever. It's kind of an adults-only enclave, sort of added on to the thrill side, the chill side, the sort of things that have made Perfect Day, Coco Cay famous. And if you like the sort of Vegas-style pool party, chance to have a cabana right there by the ocean, kind of just really a relaxing, enjoyable experience. That's what Hideaway Beach, now a part of Perfect Day, Coco Cay, is all about. And that's why we want you there with us when we all go to Perfect Day, Coco Cay as a part of our DawgNation cruise coming up in just a couple of months' time here. So Jessica Slater, the travel agent, here's what Royal Caribbean believes: that a great Royal Caribbean cruise vacation is made even better when you have a terrific travel agent who helps you plan all of that, because there's a lot of options considering things like that. If you're thinking about something beyond the DawgNation cruise, it's the ship that you want to sail on, the port you want to leave out of, the ports of call that you want to visit, and a great travel agent can sort of help you with all those options and choose what's really best for you and perhaps your family. So the one specially selected for us is Jessica Slater. You hear me mention her name all the time, and we want you to give her a call. 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com, royaldogs.com. That's an email she's put together about the dog. I should say it's a website that she's put together about our DawgNation cruise. You can cover all of that ground with her. All right, cruising around the SEC now, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Yesterday, big announcement from EA Sports, the college football video game, kind of teasing more about that. My understanding is we're going to get full details about the game coming up in May. All kinds of chatter right now, though, about what this game is going to be like, and for really an entire new generation of fans who've never experienced this game in sort of what we think of as sort of modern times and kind of contemporary times, they're about to get that chance. I can tell you my household, I have a young son. Santa Claus brought him one of these, PlayStation 5 so he could have that when the game comes out later on in the summer. I'm going to get my own controller so I can play with him there too. I've never been a huge video game person, but I just think there's a lot of excitement here around this game, and I love the idea of kind of having something like this back. And just more college football in our lives is never a bad thing. And obviously yesterday and throughout this week, you've seen some of the reaction to this. You see how true that really is. I also saw where our friends at 24/7 Sports kind of had their ranking of the players they believe will be the 10 highest rated players in this particular game, because keep in mind now, the names will be used. It won't just be, Georgia quarterback number 15. It'll be the actual player himself. And, of the top 10, Ollie Gordon, I think, from Oklahoma State ranked number 1. You had Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter both in there for Colorado. Obviously, you expect them to get some love. Carson Beck was the lone representative from UGA, who 24/7 kind of had ranked in the 10 players they believe will be the highest rated in this video game. Brad Crawford had that story, 24/7 Sports. But the bottom line is, I do think that in addition to just sort of playing the game, which a lot of people are going to enjoy doing, I do think conversations like that of who's rated where and the experience that you're having, I just think it's going to make the college football conversation once we get to the summer, I think it's going to make it a lot more fun, because we'll kind of have this to talk about. And so anytime you're bringing more college football into the discussion, we're always sort of happy about that. Now, the exact opposite, 180-degree opposite direction here involves the story coming out of LSU. We obviously go back and forth with rival teams, things like that. This is not really one of those stories for us, though. Just very, very serious situation involving Trey Holly, a running back at LSU, who's now been suspended indefinitely because he's facing a second-degree murder charge here right now, stemming from a shooting that happened in Louisiana. Holly didn't play a ton for LSU last year, but at one point in time he was freshman of the week, so he was clearly involved at least a little bit there at LSU. And this is one of those stories you just sort of mentioned because you need to. It's obviously a serious situation. I don't have a whole lot in the way of like specific details, but obviously pretty harrowing story coming out of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Trey Holly, a running back, facing a pretty serious set of criminal charges here. Back to a little bit more of a happier, chatter, at least within the boundaries of football. So Matt Rule, the Nebraska coach, was talking about Dylan Raiola and the expectation for Raiola this upcoming year. And the thing that Rule was really trying to push was this notion of you don't have to try to come here and be the 5-star. You don't have to try to come do that. We'll just take your time and grow and develop. That's the basic gist of what Raiola was told, apparently by Matt Rule, who relayed that to the public. And what I find interesting about this is, I'm not trying to be funny here, but you go back and think about the really weird AI-generated poem that Raiola shared when he went to Nebraska, the idea of not being a cog in the machine, to a place like Georgia. He's just another guy, but he can chart his own path, much to the delight of Kirk Herbstreit. If he goes to Nebraska, here is the flip side of that. And listen, at this point in time, I think Georgia fans have long since stopped being worried about the fact that Raiola didn't go to a UGA. But I do think, Rule's statement here of, just come here and develop and just take your time. We don't need you to be the 5-star. But we all also realize how untrue that is, that if you come to Georgia, you do have a chance to develop. Carson Beck's your starter. We think that Gunnar Stockton, as we said many times, would have probably been the backup. And a guy like Dylan Raiola would have had the room to grow, much the same way that Arch Manning is right now at Texas. Raiola would have had that room in a place like Georgia. In a place like Nebraska, that's just not so much the case. That, if you spend the kind of money that Nebraska allegedly spent on him, knowing the desperation those fans have to be even relevant again, forget good, forget competing for a championship, just to not be embarrassing anymore, that there is a level of pressure that Raiola will feel at Nebraska that's not the same as it would have been at a place like Georgia, where he would have just had more space to mature. So it's neither a good thing nor a bad thing. It's just a true thing, that there will be more pressure. And this idea that Rule says, we don't need you to be the 5-star. Well, no, that's exactly what they do need. That's what they paid for, and that's what a lot of those Nebraska boosters and fans will be expecting to get. So that'll be a development worth observing. And then finally, sort of the Columbus Dispatch, which is the big news entity based out of, obviously, Columbus, Ohio, did a pretty deep dive on Ross Bjork, the new Ohio State athletic director, kind of looking at some sort of troubling moments in Bjork's past, stemming from his time at Texas A&M and before that Ole Miss, and obviously some of the NCAA stuff around the time at Ole Miss. And it certainly seems like the reviews here are a little bit mixed of, what exactly happened in his past, and are we sure we want this guy there at Ohio State? I mean, what we said at the time was, forget any kind of like NCAA scandal or anything like that. We just sort of view him as a man of very limited professional accomplishments. Kind of funny to see him continually climbing the ladder without really much of a resume to justify that. But as far as like the NCAA stuff goes, I mean, who knows? I do think, though, it's interesting that for a lot of us who are longtime SEC fans, the one thing we've always heard from a lot of our Big Ten brethren is that down here in the South, we're all rednecks, we're all win at all cost, and it's cutthroat, it's winner take all, it's anything's fair, just the idea that it's sort of win first, and we don't exactly have the same value when it comes to like academics and NCAA rules and all these things. Have you noticed that the Big Ten sort of seems a lot more comfortable with this kind of thing now than they allegedly sort of used to be? Now, we think that was always sort of pretentious nonsense. But have you sort of noticed that, like Michigan, for instance, who would sort of hold itself up as the Harvard of state universities, had a coach this past year who was suspended multiple games for 2 different things over the course of the season, and Ohio State, who at one point in time would have said that we're more serious, we're in the Big Ten, we're classy, we're this and that, we don't we're not as bad as the SEC when it comes to the win now mentality, win at all cost mentality, and yet they sort of an athletic director from the SEC who was about as win at all costs as there seemed like there could have been maybe this time at Ole Miss, and certainly a little bit of an interesting tenure there at Texas A&M there as well. I just think it's really interesting as the stakes get higher and higher in the competition between, like, say, the SEC and the Big Ten, who could have proved to be the supreme superior conference in college athletics. It certainly seems like whatever the Big Ten once sort of thought about the SEC, they're more than happy to resemble the SEC in as many ways as they possibly can. You can't help but notice that, can you? That Ross Bjork under a little bit of fire as he began, fairly or not, by the way, as he begins his time there at Ohio State. It certainly feels like more and more the Big Ten starts to look a little bit more like the SEC, and maybe the pretentious sort of high-minded criticism that league once gave to the SEC, perhaps some of that not quite sticking the way that it once was. It'll just be worth paying attention to. We'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Couple of golden shoes as we wrap up here on a Friday, starting with, speaking of issues in the SEC, so there's a story in the Orlando Sentinel the other day about Florida having some NIL concerns, not having as much in the NIL coffers to sort of pay the level of player they perhaps need. And so a website called Blue Bloods Bias made a social media graphic for this that simply says, broke. You got Billy Napier standing there, Blue Bloods Bias saying the Florida Gators are struggling to raise money for their football program. They go on to sort of describe some of the issues. Mad Dog reaches out to me and says, BA, the hits keep on coming. Hashtag Go Dogs. Yeah, we can clearly make fun of that. Florida having some NIL concerns. Pretty funny stuff there, and worthy of a golden shoe indeed. On a happier note, we'll also give a golden shoe out to the Diamond Dogs there as well. They begin their season, UNC Asheville, this weekend. Best of luck to them this weekend and all season long. Golden shoe coming their way. And with that, speaking of the lousy, stinking Gators, we'll also remind you that it's been 1,196 days since Florida has beaten Georgia. That is our Gator Hater Updater. Y'all enjoy your weekend. We'll see you back here Monday. DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. We will talk to you then. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised. The price is promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on all of that. I'm going to roll through some comments here, find out what's on your mind, and then we're going to kind of bounce out of here on a Friday. We'll come back Monday, show recording today to air Monday, and then our DawgNation Roundtable, a part of the show Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Then a week from now, back Friday, we are live again in normal format. All right, so with that said, for the final time for a few days here, let's go get your comments via, we'll go YouTube first here today to kind of kick things off. And we'll just sort of see what's on everyone's mind and see how everybody's doing, and we'll have a good time with all of that. So Johnny Surf Dog says the Gator Club has rented a couple of billboards around Jacksonville trying to raise some NIL funds, which I also think is very funny. I mean, listen, nobody's just like, I mean, certainly no program has more NIL funds than they know what to do with, but it's sort of funny to see Florida having these issues. Pizza Man, thanks for the kind words. Appreciate that. Morgan Forrest says we have a fresh Bama troll over here, so there you go. Let's see what else. Paul Moon says, how big of an asterisk do you put next to Bama's 2020 trophy? Is it bigger than the trophy itself? Yeah, it is for me, and I feel that way across the board. I mean, the point we've made over and over again is look at all the things that happened in sports in 2020, and look how temporary it all seemed. Put Alabama's national championship aside for a moment. Look at Texas A&M. Texas A&M finished in the top 5 in 2020. Is that a normal occurrence in keeping with previous and later trends? No, it's not. A&M wasn't that good before that. They haven't been that good since then. That was a 2020 story. Florida won the SEC East under Dan Mullen. Look at the time prior to that. Look at the time after that. Is that keeping with any kind of consistent trend? No, that was sort of a one-off. Look at the BYU quarterback who became a NFL draft sensation and flamed out in the league shortly thereafter. Once again, that's not really in keeping with anything. Mac Jones hasn't lived up to that in the NFL level. The Dodgers won the World Series that year playing pandemic games. Not before then, not since then, but 2020, they're all about that. LeBron in the bubble with Disney World and the Lakers. Once again, not before that, not after that, but during the 2020 season, they found a way to get it done. If you even ignore the Alabama part of this and just look at other things in sports from 2020, a lot of things happened in 2020 that didn't happen before then and haven't happened since then. That was a universe unto itself. And I would say that the Alabama National Championship is a lot more in common with some of those occurrences than perhaps some of the Tide fans perhaps want to believe that it is. So yes, I am right there with you on that. Let's see what else. Crow King 123 says, I'm pretty content with myself. I wanted one national title in my life, and I got two. With possibly some more in the future. Yeah, listen, we're as happy as we can be. There's no doubt about that. Crow King also pointing out with Saban's retirement, there isn't an active coach that's beaten Kirby this decade. Is that good? Indeed, that it is. Now, that's not quite true, though, right? Because like Gus Malzahn's still active. He beat Kirby in 2017. He's at UCF. So I get the point you're making. I mean, it's obviously a very rare thing, but there aren't very many coaches. So let's just say it that way. DMart42 says the rumor is that the Bama fan tears from 2021 could flood the Sahara Desert, which is very funny. G. Grace Bama boy, the subject of crying over Herb Street. Here's the point. We never cried about that. We just said it. Look, we just call balls and strikes. Is that good or bad? It's bad. And we're not afraid to say it. And, there's this thing of like, I think a lot of people get really nervous about stuff, like at least some people get really nervous about stuff like that, because if you attack the in-group, and you can't be more the in-group than Kirk Herbstreit and ESPN. If you attack the in-group, then you're identifying yourself as the out-group, and so therefore that makes people really nervous because the out-group is the thing that nobody wants to be. But we're not afraid of that. We're not afraid of that. We're going to speak truth to power. And, this idea that, ESPN can never do something, untoward or unseemly because they're ESPN. Did you see they just gave back about 1,000 Emmys for College Game Day because they lied about who the producers were so they could feed the ego of the talent by making them think they'd won an Emmy? Did you see that? This idea that somehow there's no way, someone of Kirk Herbstreit's unimpeachable moral character could ever, inappropriately involve himself in a recruiting process. This idea that because he's famous, he's beyond reproach. That's simply not true. And I don't hate Kirk Herbstreit, but I do hate people who would say that Kirk Herbstreit is untouchable in terms of you're not allowed to criticize him. I do hate that. I don't mind telling you. Foster Moss says, have a great weekend and be good on your cruise. We are not going on a cruise next week. I wish it was, but I am just not coming to work next week. Let's see what else. So Crow King defines decade as the 2020s. You are right about that, Crow King. That's my fault. My bad. That's my bad. Taylor Russell does not believe me when I say I'm not going on a cruise. Listen, if I was going on a cruise, I'd be broadcasting all over the place. BMAC says the issue with wide receivers, this is on DawgNation.com, the issue with wide receivers coming out is there are teams like Ohio State and Tennessee that are willing to pay them over $1 million coming out of high school. If Georgia doesn't play that game, it just had to keep developing second-tier wide receivers. Yeah, I mean, you obviously hear stories about, what so-and-so got and whatever else, and I would say to a certain extent some of that's true. I'd say in another extent, always keep this in mind because we just a minute ago I saw our buddy Nature Gator over there was kind of talking about, Florida falling behind an NIL. Believe it or not, this is one of those things where a lot of programs don't mind the perception they're behind an NIL because they just think it sort of fans the flames of hysteria for their fans to give more money. And so, once again, when it comes to, so-and-so got X million dollars to go to so-and-so plays, there's really nobody that whether it be the school that wins the recruit, the school that loses the recruit himself, there's nobody that gets hurt by the idea of this recruiting process involved a very large sum of money. So I don't know. In other words, if you told me, what's really going on with Georgia in the receiver position, I would say the negative recruiting of, if you go there, you're going to really get the football enough. I'd say that probably sticks a little bit more than the NIL thing does because let's say that Jeremiah Smith wanted to come to Georgia. Would Georgia have found a way to match whatever NIL figure Ohio State allegedly paid? I'm guessing they probably would have. Ryan Wingo, Mike Matthews. If the NIL figure was all that was standing in the way, my guess is one of those players would be at Georgia here right now. Georgia would find the money in a situation like that, I believe anyway. But sometimes it's about not just paying your way out of something, you've also got to sort of convince the player that it's a good arrangement, for other reasons there as well. And I think that Georgia's probably hurt more by the negative recruiting part of this than they are by the NIL part of this. Even though, as we've kind of pointed out several times over the course of the last few days, the actual results on field don't match the negative recruiting perceptions that are out there. So much so that Julian Lewis of the day is like, honestly, I had no idea they were this good offensively, because some of this negative recruiting stuff I think really sticks, even though the facts don't quite back it up. DT says it's just not important to get 5-star wide receivers. I would say that in the future in college football, I think it's going to be important to figure out where you're okay not having 5 stars. Because, the one thing that some of the people say they're not wrong about is we do see a little bit more of a spreading out of the top players in this 2024 class. There were more players going more places than perhaps in recent years, which means that the idea that you're going to solve every problem by just bringing in 1 million 5 stars, across all position groups, that's probably not going to be possible. It's going to be a little bit more like the NFL draft, where some of your players are very high capital draft picks, first, second rounders, but you're also going to have to succeed with some fourth rounders as well, some middle round draft picks that you find, diamonds in the rough with. I think that college football is going to look a little bit more like that, where, yeah, it's great to have, the elite 5-star, and you expect to have a few of those and get them to play very well, but you better also get contributions out of the sort of lesser prospect as well, and that's one of the things that Georgia's proven very good at. And as long as Georgia's getting results with the receivers that it's bringing in, I actually don't view it to be a huge problem. I find it curious, and I'm more than happy to talk about something we find curious, and clearly you'd want to have great receivers, and so it's not a bad conversation, but it does always come with the addendum of no matter who it is that Georgia is recruiting or what it is that Georgia's not doing when it comes to recruiting wide receivers, they're actually fairly well killing it when it comes to passing yards per game and some of those overall metrics. Now, as I said, the final frontier is more receiving touchdowns. I do believe that's true, but nonetheless. Let's see what else. Ulysses Dunning says, we've never been a throwing team till now. It was running the football, playing defense. And to Ulysses' point, some of this kind of stuff is a lag. Like, think about whatever business industry you know the best. The stuff that you're reading in the news about your industry is usually about 6 months old. Have you ever noticed this? That, think about, like, say, real estate, for instance. Whatever you're reading in the news about real estate is sort of a reflection of what the previous trend was, and now actually on the ground there's a new trend that's kind of taking shape. Sometimes news just sort of lags action. And I would say that in the case of Georgia, this may be a thing too, where it's like, okay, the last couple of years, Georgia's actually been, as you said, Georgia's been throwing the ball more effectively than it's been running it. We talked about this yesterday. That Georgia was like 6th in the country in passing plays of 20 or more yards. They're nowhere near that when it comes to running plays of 20 or more yards. That a lot of ways you kind of slice up the story, the narrative, Georgia actually throws it better than it runs it. But for a good number of years prior to that, that's not the case. And so the trend and the negative recruiting still sort of reflects the old news, whereas like the new news hasn't quite taken hold as of yet. So eventually that narrative may change a little bit. I think that's probably true. Drew Thrasher says also to get those top-end receivers, you may need a guy like Dylan Bell to get 1,000 yards. That may be a lot of truth. There may be a lot of truth to that. Let us see what else is going on. Jeff Ingram says the market will eventually balance the NIL. Yeah, I do believe, and I don't take great pleasure in saying this, if NIL continues, like if the main method for paying players continues to be NIL, then eventually what you're going to see is the market become a little bit more efficient. And I hate to say it this way, but here's what's going to happen. Teams going to realize there's actually very little to gain by paying the players at the bottom end of your roster, and you need to take that money and you need to devote that to a small number of players who have outsized value. That the honest truth is there are about 10% of the overall players in college football that truly demand high dollars in the market. And this notion of we're just going to spread our money evenly across our roster. Within the next few years, assuming that NIL continues, within the next few years, almost every team, Georgia included, will just stop doing that. Because the way to get big dollars – because, look, we may joke about Florida having NIL issues. The truth is nobody feels like they've got more money they know what to do with. I mean, Ohio State's now the supposed big spending team, but a couple of years ago, Ryan Day was crying poverty about what they had. So nobody just feels like they're just swimming in NIL because NIL dollars are hard to raise. So understanding that eventually the NIL market is going to transition from, instead of trying to figure out how to raise dollars, you're going to have some hard discussions about how to allocate those dollars, because eventually you bump up to the ceiling. This is all the money we can raise. And for the most part, the major programs, with the occasional exception, for the most part, the major programs consistently over a period of years are going to raise some similar figure. This sort of belief that, well, so-and-so has just got way more NIL dollars. Market forces apply to that there as well. And if you're giving a whole bunch of money, but it's not producing wins, eventually even the programs that allegedly have way more money than everybody else, like they won't be immune to market forces either. So average it out over the course of a period of years. Most programs at the highest level are operating with a fairly similar NIL budget, we believe. And so therefore, this idea that we're going to dig deep and get people to give more, eventually you just sort of run into the ceiling on that. Your dollars are what they are. And then, therefore, the tough conversation is going to be had about NIL allocation. And that's the next frontier on all of this. And that's when the market gets more efficient. When you sort of realize that, paying $500,000 for a transfer inside linebacker, if that guy is not going to change the fortunes of your season, that may not be money well spent, with all due respect. But giving, one of the, 10% of players in the country, a much larger sum because that player can, be the difference in a couple of wins or not, that's when the market becomes more efficient. If the NIL system stays in place like it is now, that is where we're heading. A small number of players getting a lot, a large number of players getting almost nothing. That is where it's going. Mark my words. Let's see what else. Some folks in here talking about some travel, shouting out BJ Swinney. BJ's actually out of town right now, but we'll tell him he was shouted out here on the show here today. Winford Stein Spring, glad to have you here. Enjoy your weekend. Let's see what else. Sacred Grove says, and just like that, the coaches are going to become business managers. Yeah, we really do believe that there's an aspect of college football that's becoming a little bit more like being what you think of in sports, a general manager. There is some of that that's taking place. Now, some college teams have general managers. Sometimes that doesn't exactly function the way we think of a professional sports general manager functioning, but the sort of traditional GM duties, that's going to become a part of the future, I believe. At least in terms of whether it's a title or not, the tasks are going to be pretty similar. Paul Moon says Kirby's entire mentality is to get all the best players he possibly can. I already was of that mentality, but that's how he's built the UGA teams we've had. Yeah, no doubt about that. No doubt about that. All right, what else? Alan Hampton says if you kind of move into that world that dealing with locker room jealousy is going to be an issue. And in some respects, it might be. And Georgia's obviously really benefited from the sort of locker room chemistry that it's had right now. But I would also say this, and I do take locker room chemistry seriously. I do. But players are also pretty comfortable with the idea of a hierarchy. I mean, recruits know what they're ranked compared to others. Now, some of them are mad about it, and they're, motivated to go out and prove people wrong, and oftentimes they do. But players are fairly comfortable with the idea of a hierarchy. This notion of, hey, once you get here, everybody's the same. Sports doesn't quite work that way in real life necessarily. So, this notion that we move into a future where a couple of players get a lot of money and most players get almost nothing, if that were to be the case, that hierarchy kind of already exists in the minds of the players anyway. I mean, because remember, the overwhelming majority of players in college football are not former four stars. So they already look at this like sort of exclusive club of the recruits that got all the attention from On3 and 24/7. They already sort of see that hierarchy in place anyway. So, in fact, we've heard from players on some of that kind of stuff over the years, not just Georgia, but other places there as well, of like just being aware that there was a hierarchy. I mean, even if you're involved in like youth sports now, there's like a hierarchy in youth sports there too. And, sometimes it may be accurate, sometimes it may be not, but it is ever present. So, sports have always been to a certain extent and are certainly now about ranking things. And people have a tendency to know where they're ranked. Sacred Ghost says, hey, just being a starter compared to a backup, that's already a little bit of a hierarchy. And I would say that's kind of true. Yeah, that's true. Plus, it's like we did the DawgNation appreciation that one time, and this was all in good fun. It was joking, but like, Lorenzo Carter and Davin Bellamy and even Sony and Nick were doing this a little bit. They're always joking about how like Roquan Smith never got yelled at during practice, like because he was just always doing exactly what he was supposed to do. It's like even among these like really great players, they sort of viewed Roquan in a hierarchy above himself because he didn't get yelled at in practice because he was always doing exactly what he was supposed to do. So like, even in the category of great players, they sort of see a hierarchy there a little bit too. All right, let's do a couple quick comments. We got to go. Randy Hall shouting out UGA softball, ranked number 4 in the country. That's really fun. That's really fun. So good luck to them. They have a big game today. Is that right? Or maybe playing right now. Maybe am I right about that? Jeff Ingram says scouting is going to become huge for teams as coachable and coaches who are able to coach up will be the most important. Yeah, I think that Jeff's bringing up a good point. And I do believe that scouting is more difficult when you're younger because bodies just change. I mean, like I talk to a lot of high school coaches about this because they're like scouting sometimes like junior high, like middle school level players trying to figure out, who can be a player at the high school level. And, they're just dealing with, okay, these are bodies in transition here a little bit. And what's this guy going to become? And I mean, y'all know this. Some of you were like this. Bodies can dramatically transform while in high school. And so part of the reason why the NFL makes you be a junior to come in the league is A, they benefit from the free marketing that college football provides them. And B, it's just easier to scout a junior than it is a 18-year-old. And so scouting, I do believe, is going to become much more important. And as you said, also trying to scout for some of these intangibles as well. And scouting very young athletes is just really difficult. Scouting very young athletes is just really difficult. Jerry Popham says that he's got 90% of attention on us and 10% on the Genesis. I do love Riviera Country Club. So, Jerry, I certainly understand that. He says Tiger's body appears to be exactly what it is, and over the hill, middle-aged man. Yeah, so he was 1 over yesterday. Did I see that for Tiger? But now Jerry says he needs to hang it up. Like I'm in favor of, listen, just keep on going, keep on playing. I mean, I've told y'all before, I'm never hanging it up. And so, I certainly root for, I didn't want Tom Brady to retire. I don't want Tiger Woods to stop playing. I don't want Phil Mickelson to stop playing. I want you to hold on as long as you can. Joel Moody also shouting out Caitlin Clark, who last night became the NCAA's all-time leading scorer for women's basketball, have 49 points. I mean, listen, she deserves a ton of credit because not only is she a terrific player, but she's brought a level of interest to women's basketball that has never existed before. And I mean, she's not the only marketable player in women's basketball, of course. But man, what a level of attention she's brought to the sport in addition to obviously being really very good. Rick Martin says, I was disappointed. I thought Georgia basketball was going to finally break through. We're a little disappointed in that ourselves. Anything else before we go here today? Let us see what else. Lance D expecting a drop from Michigan. I think you could be right about that. All right, so good stuff. Let's get ready to go for now. Thanks for the live comments here today. I'll see you for those a week from now, next Friday. But Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, as you all interact with each other, I think you're going to really enjoy the shows we have coming for you. Really good stuff along the way on that as I enjoy some time with my family, which I'm very much excited for. And then I will look forward to seeing all of you back here again there as well. So Monday we're back. And thanks to our friends at RS Andrews who make the cool down possible. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. You start thinking about some of these little February getaways. It kind of makes you realize, softball, baseball are cranked up. My own children's spring sports kind of rolling on here too. That means spring is not too far away, which means air conditioning units. Start thinking about getting that thing ready to keep you cool spring and summer all the season long here in the Atlanta area, the state of Georgia. No easy feat with as hot as it gets. So go ahead and get the peace of mind you need by making sure your air conditioning unit is ready for what's coming. rsandrews.com's got you covered on all of that. So find them online, rsandrews.com, and we'll see you back here for a live edition of the RS Andrews Cool Down next Friday. And, of course, Dog Nation Daily presented by Kroger on Monday. Have a great weekend, everybody.